Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to the sheep pen. Bah! Bah! So today we're going to tackle part 2 of the big lie. And where I left off, I'm just going to jump right in. Where I left off was we kind of hit the beginning of Christianity. We kind of talked about Paul and some of the things, the way the direction of the foundation of the church went. We talked about judgment versus love, and Judaism versus the true message of the gospel, which is love, forgiveness, an abandonment of moral judgments on people, and the acceptance of people as they are with love. And how I believe that this is the true message of the gospel. And this is the driving force behind what I'm doing, is that love has been kicked to the curb in favor of this Judeo-Christian moral values at the cost of love and at the cost of people's spirituality. And it's a form of control that these restrictions are placed on the Christian walk. These conditions is a better term for it. They are conditions that you must meet before you were allowed to enter into communion with God. And in reality, it's an open door. It's a standing invitation that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. All you have to do is reach out and get a hold of it. So that's the summary. We're going to start now at the end of the biblical age and enter into what I call the religious dark ages, or the seemingly black hole that goes from the end of the book of Acts until the Council of Nicene in the 4th century. So we're looking at about a 300-year period here. I was taught in the organization that I was raised up in that they were primitivists, which means they thought they had found the original form of worship. This is the idea behind Pentecostalism and charismatic worship, that they believe that they found the original form of gathering and worship, and they come to this almost by a cosmic way. Like they just kind of manifest this based on nothing. Because at the time of the Reformation, which kind of coincides with the time the King James Bible was written, we'll get down to that later on in this episode or a future episode, that I have some issues with the translations of the Bible that are available to us. And so at any rate, we're in this kind of this vacuum after the end of the Bible era and before we really get to the church age. And so I was taught that by these primitivists that we had no idea what happened in the first 300 or 400 years of the church, and that they kind of have an attitude that anything that happened before the Reformation is kind of null and void. Any information you get that comes from the source of Catholicism is seen to be tainted, and they would rather just guess, just pray about it and guess, than look at the information, because they don't trust the source of Catholicism. So one of the things that changed for me is that when I came into my ministry training, I guess along about a third of the way through my ministry, after I'd already been established in charismatic circles, I'd already been established in evangelical Baptist circles, and I got introduced to Catholicism through a movement called the Convergence Movement, which is a move towards a one world religion or a one Christian faith. And so to do that, they had to resurrect Catholicism so that they can get past the Protestant Catholic schism, okay, the Reformation Protestant movement. And so when I got involved in that, I immediately realized I'd been lied to. That these people in the Pentecostal, charismatic, evangelical world absolutely knew how early church was, what the early church was like. But now, not the people on the ground, they bought the same lie I did. This is part of the big lie. The big lie is we don't know how the original church was before the Council of Nicene. We don't know. We don't really recognize any of the Catholicism that happened for the first 1,000 years of Christianity. And so I want to paint a picture for you of the church, we'll say at or around the death of Paul and from there on out. So Christianity at its beginning was very open. It was very open for interpretation. Everyone had their own take on who Jesus was, what his life meant, and what was the meaning of his teachings. And so, hang on, I got some distractions. There we go. I had some background playing over there that was bothering me. So anyway, they were very open-minded, very open. There was no judgment, one group against the other. There wasn't a lot of fighting. There was kind of live and let live. Let everybody work out their own salvation with fear and trembling. Let everyone kind of individually or small groups decide what Jesus means to them and what his life and his ministry and his eventual crucifixion meant to them as people and as spirit beings. And so there was this openness that produced a wide variety of Christian thought. When we look at things now, we think of Christians' thought as even though we're segmented and we're scattered and there's all these denominations, there's this core, what we call the Nicene Creed. It's the center of all Christian belief, okay, whether they tell you that or not. If there is a statement of faith, it's going to include the Nicene Creed language with a few things added and or taken away or altered. But at the core of it is this basic belief of what it means to be a Christian. And you need to know how we got there, so that you can judge that for yourself and not just swallow information historically because you were told that's the right way. Don't question, right? Where the Bible tells us to try the prophets, to try the spirits, to question, to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling, to seek God on our own terms and in our own way and not just swallow the party line, which is the opposite of what Orthodox Christianity says, which is just trust me. This is the way it is. This is the way it's always been. Don't question. Just come to church, give us your money, and do what we say. And in reality, the Christian faith, it was much more diverse and free than that. Okay, and we are experiencing what some might call freedom now under the American format, freedom of religion, the First Amendment. But in reality, Orthodox Christianity is still a closed-off space where anyone that thinks anything different about history, anything different about the meaning of Jesus' life, anybody like me, and probably some of you, we're outcasts. We're not allowed to speak. People come onto my channel constantly, basically trying to silence me. You don't see this because I have a sword. I have a sword in the form of a delete button, and I just silence them because, you know what? If you wanna espouse or investigate or be influenced by Christian orthodoxy, just pick any one of these faithless, empty churches up and down the street, and they'd be more than happy to give you the party line. So this space here is for new ideas, for open minds, not for orthodoxy, and not to drag us back into this failed system, because the church is a failure, period. If you don't think so, look out your window. It's hell out there. It ain't heaven. Right? We aren't manifesting heaven, we're manifesting hell. Okay? Anybody with half a brain knows that, and if you don't, you're in denial. Okay? The world is not a better place than it used to be. It's getting worse by the day, and I have to lay that blame at the people in charge of the church. The main tool that God set in place for us as believers is now broken, right, through human interference. So let's get back to history. The first 300 years had Christian sects, Christian groups. I hate that sect and sex, it sounds the same. But these small Christian groups varied from what you might consider Orthodox Catholicism, right, to Pentecostal freedom and charismatic behavior or religious beliefs. Some of them were like hermit-based, Ascean-based, you know, kind of linked more to John the Baptist than Jesus. You know, people that wandered in the wilderness, people that locked themselves in caves and sought God for months or years or decades. And those people are kind of split into a couple different sorts, all right? And basically what I'm talking about here is what's referred to as Gnosticism. Now, Neo-Gnosticism or modern Gnosticism is something you should avoid because it seeks to switch the roles up and paint Lucifer as Jesus and Jesus as the devil. And so you want to avoid that. That is an unfortunate manifestation brought about by 19th century spiritualism and groups like Madame Blavatsky and the what's it called? It's called soft something. Soft, I don't remember. It's kind of a cross between philosophy and religion. And so, at any rate, at the time following the end of the Bible in the book of Acts, we have this really diverse group of people. And at the core of them are some people that we'll just call Gnostics, okay? And the original Gnostics were split in two. One believed that your human nature is the enemy, and that your urges are what has to be overcome. Your animal nature, your base nature, your lusts, your hunger, your thirst, your need for other people, your need for love, that all of your needs should be abandoned because they separate you from God, and you should seek out this purely spiritual existence that's apart from your humanity. They believed that your human nature is what separates you from God. This is kind of what took hold through a group called the Desert Fathers, and this is going to be coming from Egyptian beliefs. These Desert Fathers are the kind of people, in one instance which I've talked about before on this channel, there was a Desert Father who had a lot of big following, and he climbed up on an obelisk, basically a pole, on about a 4-foot by 4-foot platform, and he lived there for decades, and he never came down, and he just stayed up there, I guess trying to get higher to God. And so, at any rate, these, I got to start putting my phone on airplane mode when I'm recording, because I get all these calls coming in. So if you hear some dinging or some noise, that's what's happening. We're going to keep trucking. So, this one Desert Father wouldn't eat and he wouldn't drink, and so his followers kept him alive. They'd climb up the pole every day and put food up there, and most of the time he wouldn't eat it. He'd kick it off. He wouldn't take care of himself. And I remember one incident that was just so interesting, is that one of his followers came up there, and they noticed that this guy had open wounds, and maggots had infested his wounds. And he said, look, you got to clean these wounds up. They're going to kill you. And this guy, this Desert Father, says, I would give you his name if I could remember, but it's something Egyptian. But anyway, he said, look, worms have to eat just like the rest of us do. You know, let them have their corruption. They're eating away the corruption. And he just ignored his own body. It's not just personal neglect. This leads to a thing called selfflagellation, not to be confused with flatulation. Totally different deal. Flagellation is beating yourself up, literally, not physically. Which kind of reminds me of a movie called Liar Liar, when Jim Carrey's in the bathroom, and I don't know, he's having a crazed moment, and he just starts, well, he wants to look beat up, so he has an excuse not to tell the truth, and so he's beating his own self up. And once again, loose language here, we're going to use the language of the street. This is what they said in the movie. But a guy opened the door and sees this guy beating himself up and smashing his head against the wall, and he goes, what's wrong with you? And he goes, can't you tell? I'm kicking my own ass. So these people basically beat themselves up, deny themselves the basic needs of a human. That is the group of Gnostics that kind of took hold and influenced the church through the Desert Fathers. And this happens primarily at the Council of Nicene. They were very powerful, these men. They had a big following, and they were obviously stubborn. And so I want to talk about what the Council of Nicene is in a minute. But the other side of Gnostics were people who felt differently. They felt nothing could separate you from the love of God. They felt like instead of beating yourself up, you should take care of yourself. You should eat right. You should exercise. You should tend to your sexuality however you see fit. They had a very loose moral, what you would consider by today's standards. Well, the world lives this way now. They were kind of living then like most people live now, just doing their own thing, taking care of life, right? And they sought to transcend the human experience by feeding the animal side and letting it be. And they believed that nothing in your body could defile your spirit. That nothing you did as far as personal excesses or sexual promiscuity, that none of this had any effect whatsoever on your spirituality. And that it was, in fact, a tool to, like, one side, you know, the Desert Fathers, they wanted to crucify the flesh. They wanted to destroy your human nature, your animalistic nature, and the other side wanted to embrace it to appease it. So you just appease it so you can take it over here. You don't have any lust because you satisfied them. You don't have any hunger because you've eaten. You don't have any of these problems because you put them over here in another thing and just let them be. And now you can kind of detach yourself from all of those things and get a more pure, natural, spiritual connection to God. Okay? So it's the battle of these two sides of the Gnostic movement, which was the majority of the church in the beginning. Let's not get that twisted. That they all fell into one of these two camps. Paul, you can kind of see in some of his writings to the Romans, and especially the Ephesians, and to some lesser degree the church in the Galatians church, that they all had varying issues. This is why Paul in one famous quote says, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do." Right? Just avoid engaging in their idolatry and eating meats that have been consumed, or have been prepared through sacrifice to pagan gods. That was the only restriction Paul placed on the Roman church. And the rest of the time he taught love. He taught how to treat each other within the church, how to treat each other within the body of Christ. In the book of Ephesians and Corinthians, that's another one. Corinthians, not Ephesians. Corinthians is the church that got out of control on him. I'm thinking Corinthians 13 maybe, somewhere 11 to 13. I don't know, but look it up if you want to. I have it all up here. I know the Bible in chronological order, right? Some of the details I don't want to spend the time on because it doesn't matter. I'm after the spirit of the fact, right? Not the fact itself. So I believe it was the Corinthians. They were engaging in a lot of sexual immorality, what we would consider immorality by today's standards. But really, they were just being Greeks and Romans, right? They were just acting in the way of the culture. Much like our culture has free love and free divorce, and your marriage vow to another person is all that matters to each other, and when you decide to dissolve that, you dissolve it. And they didn't even involve the government or the church or anything. And some of these, I think in the Corinthians deal, some of these kind of turns into love fests where they're just, they have the word I'm looking for. They already have the habits through paganism to involve sexual magic, as it were, sex magic, orgies and stuff like that as a form of worship, and that starts to bleed into the church. And then they also have this deal where, the speaking in tongues and the pew jumping and stuff that we see in Pentecostal churches was out of control, and teaching wasn't happening in favor of this more spiritual manifestation. So there's a lot of correction coming from Paul. And this is the beginning of the Gnostic split. We can see that you start to see people that see that as okay and other people have a problem with it. And what ends up happening is that you have all these groups with everybody having a different idea. Some people believe that Jesus was all God and that his humanness was an illusion, and that the body up on the cross being crucified was almost like a clone, or that the spirit of Jesus detached from that, and that in their belief system he would actually stand in the crowd and watch his own crucifixion and laugh at them for thinking they got to him when they were just killing an empty shell, right? So there's all of these really diverse belief systems that were legit. They were, as far as I don't know what's right in those, I'm not trying to give it credibility, I'm just saying it existed at the time, and it was okay with everybody that we all work out our salvation with fear and trembling. Come on, this is a personal choice. That's the problem with orthodoxy. They take away the personal choice. They force you into this box, and they don't let you figure it out on your own. And this channel and this movement and this thing I'm starting with the sheep pen is all about you trying to figure it out for yourself. Don't even just take what I'm saying as gospel, right? Do the research, figure it out for yourself, put in the thought time, but don't let this guilt and shame that is brought to you by orthodoxy and the mainstream church prevent you from searching. Search the Bible, search your heart, search history, search yourself. Look and see if you can find a golden thread that attaches the good parts of this Christian faith with all other religions, because you'll find there is a thread. There's a thread of truth, that every religion has a thread of truth. And when you find that it connects us all, you start to get an idea of what true religion is, what true faith is, and what it's all about, because it is ultimately all about love. Now, a Roman emperor around in the 4th century, his name was Constantine. He founded a city called Constantinople, and he moved the seat of the Roman Empire from the west to the east, where he ruled there in what is now Istanbul, Turkey. Okay? He needed a religion to unify Romanism. That the Roman Empire was a very diverse religious place, that you could pray to whatever God you wanted. It was kind of like today in America. You could walk down the street and take your pick of 10 different kinds of religions and go in and do your thing. You could go to multiple different religions. You could pray to one God one week for one thing, and another God to another thing for another thing the next week, and it was very open. And Constantine decided that he needed unity. He needed unity in government, he needed unity in the people's thinking, and he needed unity in religion. And so he handpicked Christianity, which was just kind of a fad at the time. It was a fad that was starting to take hold in some of the upper echelons of Romanism and the Roman culture and in the higher class people, that this religion that had originally been hiding from Roman persecution in the catacombs and underground and in small groups started to come out. When that persecution started to end, Constantine ended that persecution, freeing it up even more. And then he eventually makes Christianity the faith of the Roman Empire. But to do that, he had to solidify it. He had to make it. He couldn't handle all this diversity. The diversity in the Christian world gave him the same problem that the paganism gave him in the Roman culture. That he did not have this cohesive thing to lean on in Christianity either, so he had to force it. And it was easier to force the Christians into one thought than it was to deal with all of these diversified pagan ideas. So he sends out a decree to all of the Christian bishops in the world. He announces a council. Your involvement is mandatory, and those people were forced. Requested first, then forced at sword point if they needed to be, or even tortured or blackmailed, or even in some cases their homes and families and churches destroyed, to force them to have nothing left at home. So they had to come to this council in Nicaea. And essentially Constantine sits down at the table once all these people, and some of them are horribly persecuted, to be forced to come there. All right, this is not a, hey, let's get together and talk kind of thing. This is like your presence is demanded at your own peril. You can come or you can be executed. That was it. Come here or die. And so these people were held captive for years, while their homes and families had to live without them, while their churches fell into disrepair. They were not given the choice. And the only way out was to come to a conclusion. Constantine wanted a statement of faith. He got that. That's now what we call the Nicene Creed. Then he wanted a canonized book, a group of books that everyone agreed on. Because another diverse thing about the early church is they all had different books. There's so many precious books that were available during the first 300 years of Christianity that have been lost. And many of them have been recovered because some of these holy men, some of these bishops, these leaders of these organizations knew that their Christianity form was being targeted by this council, and they would no longer be able to teach openly or preach openly what they really believed, and they believed that a lot of their holy books were going to be discarded or even erased from the narrative, just erased from the situation. And so they buried them. And the most famous of these was discovered, I don't know, 100 years ago by a shepherd boy, and it's called the Nag Hammadi Library. Okay, it's a group of scrolls that were found buried. Another group of this is called the Dead Sea Scrolls, and all of these confirm the canon, but they also confirm the existence of all these other items, these other beliefs. So, at the Council of Nicaea, these people were forced to abandon their belief system and come to a compromise. The Trinity was a compromise. Some people believed that Jesus was God incarnate that came down. Other people believed that Jesus was the Son of God. And some people just believed that Jesus was Adam reincarnated. There's a scripture where Jesus calls himself the new Adam. Go find that. If it hasn't been Mandela affected out of the Bible, don't. Sorry, little levity there. How do you sell a deaf man a chicken? You want to buy a chicken? Sorry, trigger alert. Sometimes you just got to break the tension. So, at the Council of Nicaea, this struggle ended up with a compromise that was really the problem that we have today. That was not really the true nature of Christ. It was a compromise between Judaism, between Gnosticism, between paganism, and you end up with something that kind of works for everyone. They kept the Trinity as a political decision to bridge the gap between paganism and Christianity. That between the three natures of God, as exhibited in the concept of the Trinity, that there was something for everyone. Right? And it helped some of the pagan people who couldn't deal with just one God. Right? So they kind of invent the idea of God in three persons. There's been a lot of talk about how I feel about the Trinity. I'm going to go into a deep discussion about the Trinity because it's this discussion that I engaged in that really helped me lock down the idea of Jesus, okay, and who he was and who he is and where is he right now and what is his role and position in the universe and especially on this earth right now. But that's for a future time. Hang in with me. I've got years of this stuff to download to you. This is the beginning of a very long relationship. I hope you all hang in there with me. So what we have then is a corrupted and compromised and by force pigeonholed religion that persists until the Reformation. And the answer to any what they call heresy or any disagreement with this orthodoxy usually resulted in the burning of towns, the burning of churches, the execution of religious leaders, the seizing of property from anyone who supported them. It's kind of like a war on terror that we do now, where it's just this scorched earth response to anybody that's linked to it. Heresy was seen as terrorism, and they did the same thing to these people. Okay, and what you end up with is this really kind of homogenized and mostly dysfunctional church who is more associated with political power than personal spiritual growth. Within it, you have some people that keep some of these Gnostic ideas alive, whether they're people that wear, it's just St. Francis of Assisi, the Benedictine monks. All of these people come up in society to keep pulling us back from political and into a spiritual walk and into the concept of love and sacrifice. And some of them use the Gnostic self-deprecation. Some of them use the other Gnostic side in the space of the Cathars, where they kind of preached, you know, each person, each group is responsible for coming up with their own ideas about who Jesus was and what he means to you today. And so this kind of leads us to the next stop, which is the next big lie, right? Is what happens, there's a religious decision made for political purposes again during the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages were a time at the fall of the Roman Empire when there's a vacuum of law and order. And the world falls into a dog-eat-dog kind of situation once the Romans kind of pull back to Rome, pull back to the Eastern Empire, and there's this vacuum of it's just a vacuum of leadership. And the monks at the time were preserving all of the antiquities, all of the icons. They were preserving all of the relics, you know, like the finger bone of Peter and all this stuff. You know, the true cross, a piece of the true cross, a nail from the cross. But they were also preserving the ancient writings, not just of Christians, but of most of the Greco-Roman writings we have today are directly related to these monks who saw them as valuable historically, and they took the time to sit down and transcribe them letter by letter, sometimes spending years or decades on a single volume. And a lot of times they spent time illustrating it, so they were drawing and painting and creating these works of art that were one of a kind. And this is how the Bible survived. This is also how a lot of the things that were lost in the fire at the Alexandria Library in Egypt were restored and rediscovered. And the thing is because they were under papal control still at this point, and they felt this obligation to protect the faith, anything that was seen as controversial was locked up in the Vatican Library forever. The secrets to the true faith are locked away in the library at the Vatican, and you will never see them until Jesus comes back, I'm sure of it. The ultimate suppression of truth. And what I ended up with on this search is a much freer form of Christian faith. much more about your own spiritual journey, much more about you figuring out what Jesus means to you, than adhering to this strict moral and religious and political concept that there's freedom in Jesus, and who Jesus sets free is free indeed. And you are free not just from your dark side, not just from the enemy, but you are free from this orthodoxy and control, this box that they have put God into. And so what I'm offering you is an opportunity to rediscover some of these lost ideas with me. Let me walk you down the pathway that led to my salvation that I worked out with fear and trembling. I have several friends that are good people. They are basically Christians. They don't go to church. They also do not fit for one reason or another into the moral box that you must have to be a Christian. But yet they have a relationship with Jesus. And I've seen them work miracles. I've seen them work miracles in their lives and the lives of the people around them. And they exhibit the fruit. One of my mentors used to say, I'm not a judge, but I am a fruit inspector. I really like that. I'm not a judge, but I'm a fruit inspector. Your fruit will tell me. And the fruit of this modern church is mayhem. The fruit of this modern church is guilt. I can't tell you how many people have killed themselves in modern times because they could not make their own belief system line up with orthodoxy, and they felt so isolated from society that they just took their own life out of desperation. That the fruit of the church is judgment, hate, division, right? So these friends of mine, these people I've known down through the years, they will often say this one thing. When you ask them about their religious ideas, about their walk, their faith, their heart, they will say, me and God got an understanding. Me and God got an understanding. We just came to an understanding. That's ultimately what reconciling with God is coming to an understanding. And you can't have other people tell you exactly what it is that that understanding should be. And it's not one box that all fits in. It's not one faith that everyone must adhere to. It is a manifestation of working out your own salvation with fear and trembling. But back to the Dark Ages. I got a couple more minutes. I'd like to keep this kind of short. I don't want to go long with this video, because there's probably going to be a third one, but we'll see. During the Dark Ages, these monks that were preserving history, that had taken upon themselves to kind of give stability to an unstable world, they decided collectively at some point to lie to you for your own good. They decided on this very strict adherence to the law, almost a resurrection of the Jewish law, for the purpose of moral control. This is something that when you get to the high levels of Christians, of Christian ministers, they'll tell you, that's what we did then. It's carried down through time. We're still doing it today. Basically, they'll tell you people can't handle the truth. Society can't handle spiritual freedom. They have to be told what to do. They have to be treated like mushrooms. They have to be kept in the dark and fed full of crap. Personal joke there you can have. And I don't like being treated like a mushroom, right? Kept in the dark and fed full of crap. But this is what they did for your own good. But in doing so, they placed people in spiritual prison. They placed people in a box. And I'm not going to pass judgment on whether that was beneficial or not to society. I know that there was collateral damage, and there still is collateral damage. Some of you here today are here listening to me because you're a victim of this collateral damage, that you were thrown under the bus by religion, that you were convicted of a crime, whether you got forgiveness or not. They don't care. You're convicted. What am I hearing? Well, that's a low-flying aircraft. Okay, so these people, like you and I, we're the collateral damage. And God's called this ministry to go back and reclaim those people, to give you the freedom to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, to give you a safe place to know that Jesus loves you, and to let you know that we are open to however you interpret your own walk, as long as you're not doing it out of an obligation to orthodoxy, as long as you're not one of these goats who puts their own religion ahead of other people's feelings, that they spend more time arguing the Bible than they do helping their fellow man. Remember Jesus' words. I was naked and you didn't clothe me. I was hungry and you didn't feed me. I was sick and you didn't visit me in the hospital. I was in prison and you didn't visit me. And the Christian people said, Lord, when were you any of these things? And he said, when you didn't do this for the least of these, for my children, you didn't do them for me. So I know you not. Depart from me. I never knew you. Don't end up on the sheep and goat judgment day being a goat. Be a sheep. Walk in love. Have an open mind. Consider everyone's feelings. Right? It's better to just suck it up, Buttercup, than it is to take out your wrath on another human. And if the world would just start acting in love today, the world would be transformed overnight. I hate to quote the Beatles. I think it was the Beatles that said, all we need is love, or love is the answer. But ultimately, it really is. And now we just have to figure out what love is. And isn't that the big question? What is love? Well, I hope that I can show you what love is by showing you love and treating you with love. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you. And may he bless you in all of your ways. To support this channel, write to P.O. Box 92, Sparks, Oklahoma 74869. Or click on the PayPal description in the bottom. And I try to interact with everybody that makes a donation. If I missed you, it's just because I'm still trying to figure out PayPal on my phone and how to communicate with people. And sometimes I've almost got it mapped out. Pretty soon I'll be able to communicate with everybody. But right now, it just almost seems like that phone has a mind of its own. All right. We'll see you next time at the sheep pen.